Hello, welcome to Grooving.For.Heaven.Vol.1. I'm Norm Stockton, and I'm really happy to be able to spend this time with you, kind of hanging out and talking shop about some of the issues that we deal with as bassists in the worship setting. A number of the things that we'll be discussing today can be categorized as general musical concepts and ideas that are applicable pretty much to any situation in which you might be involved, whether it's playing bass in church or in clubs or on concert stages. And some of the other things will be specifically geared towards some of the unique considerations that we deal with in worship. In this first part of a 2-volume series, we'll be focusing on some things to really help establish that solid foundation to your playing. With an instrument as relatively young as the electric bass guitar, it's really common for people to end up having kind of a sand foundation. You tend to learn this instrument just by kind of picking it up and going for it. And that has benefits in certain regards because it develops your ability to improvise and your ear training. But what happens is that you reach a certain point and realize that there are impediments in your technique or your musical concepts even that are difficult to move beyond. So to that end, in this video, we'll be looking at some of those things that will really help establish that solid foundation. Those include some warm-up exercises and stretches that I think are really important, proper hand and bass positioning, getting familiar with your fingerboard to get it so that it all ties together and makes sense to you. To what I refer to as pre-groove studies, which is a focus on increasing your ability to hear and analyze beat placement within a groove, as well as developing your rhythmic and harmonic ideas to better enable you to determine what to play when it's time to play. We'll be looking at a number of different styles of music that may inspire you to explore some fresh ways of approaching your bass lines. We'll also be covering some conceptual ideas that I think are really important for any musician, but especially a bass player. We'll be going over some practice ideas with a focus on developing your sense of time. We'll take a brief look at the use of effects. And lastly, but definitely not leastly, we'll be taking a look at some issues of the heart and some ministry considerations. That stated, I like to say that it's my motivation to motivate you in your bass playing and in your ministries to give you some ideas and some information and some tools that will help equip you. This is certainly not an all-inclusive, everything you ever needed to know about playing bass, but these are some things specifically that I think will really help you out. Additionally, due to the time constraints of an instructional video, we'll be spending more time focusing on technical and musical considerations than on an in-depth study of the word. But I definitely encourage you to do just that. Otherwise, all we're really making is just pretty sounds, right? Anyway, I'm really glad to be able to spend this time with you. Without further ado, let's hit it. I would be remiss if we were to talk about some foundational bass issues without briefly talking about warm-ups and stretches. As someone who's dealt with tendonitis, I actually still deal with tendonitis to a certain extent. I played for years and never warmed up, and I ended up paying for it. I'm a big advocate of warm-ups and stretches now. It's one of the things that helps me to even be able to play these days. Now, if you're anything like me, what happens is you get to the venue, wherever you're going to be playing, and when everybody's getting set up, you have less gear usually as a bass player, so you get set up pretty quick, and pretty soon you have your amp up on 9 and you're wanting to jam a little bit, so you go through every conceivable lick at a ridiculous tempo, and what happens is you don't get a chance to properly warm up before you're really exerting yourself. What I found helpful is a particular exercise that I can do during the drive to church or whatever venue I'm playing in. And what it involves is a light tapping motion between my thumb and my other fingers. What I do is get my arm into the approximate position I'll be playing and basically go like so. It's nothing complicated, but what it does is it starts exercising those tendons and getting them warmed up so that when I get to church, they've had some activity. And you could do it in any sort of sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 3, 2, 4. I just go through all the different things. But it's very effective at getting your arms warmed up. Additionally, there's a stretching exercise for the hand that actually Stu Ham talks about, and I think he learned it from Carol Kay. But it involves getting your first and third fingers and holding them under your thumb like so and kind of stretch, and then swapping it so that your second and fourth finger do the same thing. So you kind of go back and forth between the two. So it takes, it's a little bit weird at first, but you can get it pretty quickly. And I go through those and these and kind of just do this. And I can't emphasize enough how important this is for the longevity of your playing career and your ministries. Do this for 5 or 10 minutes, every time before you play, and your arms and fingers will be grateful for years to come. Another factor I'd like to mention is strap length, and it's really often overlooked in my opinion. What happens is most people, when they're practicing, they're sitting like so, on the couch or whatever, watching TV, and they've got their bass up in this general position. Now, when they're actually playing on the gig, they've got their rock star strap length, right, where the bass is down to here. Well, if you look at the way your fingers are playing and just the position of your hands on the bass, you'll find that the mechanics have totally changed, haven't they? I'm not an anatomy scholar, but I think that even the muscles that you're using are subtly changing, or at least the way that you're using them has changed. And what this translates into is potential for your practice things to not come off as smoothly when you're actually playing. So what you want to do is set your strap length so that the bass remains generally in the same position whether you're seated or standing. So if I'm standing or if I'm sitting, it's generally staying approximately in the same position. That way there can be some consistency between your practice and your actual playing time. And as a quick aside, it's for this reason that I really don't like those boingy, stretchable guitar straps. They may be comfy, but they ain't helping. Leave those for guitar players who are more interested in looking cool than playing well anyway. No, just kidding. Taking a quick look at hand position. Let's look at your left hand or fretting hand for just a moment. Now, most of you have probably learned or been taught to play with the 1 finger per fret method, the C major scale. Where you're basically playing where your first finger handles all the notes at this fret position and so on and so forth. Now, that works really well when you're playing a scale-based line. Say you were going to be doing something, though, that was more of a non-scale type line, maybe more of a groove type fingering, maybe more of an octave-based fingering. How would that same fingering work? Say you're doing something like a... That's obviously not that comfortable, right? What I wholeheartedly recommend is that you do the 1 finger per fret type of fingering when you're playing anything that's scale-based, but go with more of an index finger on the root and like pinky on the high octave or whatever other note is higher here, 5th octave, for your groove type of lines. Check it out. Here's an example real quick. Now, did you see how during the groove portion of that, I was using the index finger and pinky kind of thing, right? But at the end of that fourth bar, I had that scale bass line, and I reverted back to the 1 finger per fret type of fingering. That gets to what I refer to as default fingerings. You know, everybody should have one or ideally several different default fingerings for the various scales that you play. But then you've also got your alternate sort of real world groove playing type of fingering. And what I want to encourage you to do is work on going back and forth between the two within the context of a groove and try to make that transition between the two seamless and natural. Another thing I'd like to emphasize is this. A lot of bass players started out by playing guitar. You know, it's got fewer strings, so it must be easier, right? But what happens is that guitar players are used to using a really arched left hand, the fingers on your left hand are very arched when you're playing, so that every note of your augmented, lamented, fermented, demented chord rings freely. Well, that's the opposite of what you're trying to achieve as a bass player. Now, if you're playing chords on your bass, that goes beyond the scope of what we're discussing right now. The vast majority of the time, the bass is a monophonic instrument. You just want to play one note at a time. So what you want to do is develop a technique that'll allow you to only play the notes, only have the notes ring that you're trying to play, and all the other notes be muted. Muting is really the name of the game. Admittedly, you won't be able to go to your favorite music store probably and find a bunch of videos by big name players talking about their muting technique. It's not particularly flashy, but it's so important. And if you listen to those players, 99% of them have absolutely got the muting thing down. Now, the good news is that there are some things you can do, minor adjustments to your technique, that will allow you to play clean and appropriately muted lines without having to invest additional thought or effort on your part. It'll just happen because that's the technique you've developed. What it involves is flattening out your left or fretting hand, as you guitar players out there cringe. And when you're playing in the 1 finger per fret type of position, you want to basically have your fingers as close to the strings as possible to minimize the motion. When you're in the right position, take your fingers off the neck and see what it looks like. Generally speaking, it should look like this. If your fingers look more like this, you're probably not doing enough muting with your left hand. You want to flatten it out so it looks a little bit more like so. An exercise you can use to develop or ensure effective left hand muting goes like so. The notes here aren't important. We're basically just going to do kind of a chromatic line going up. But let's just start on the 5th fret of the E string. Okay, so we're playing the A. What you do is play that A with your first finger. And after you play it, strum the other strings. My first finger is resting on those other strings lightly and muting them. See that? Now I move up and play the same, play the next note up with my second finger, and then strum the strings again. Should still be muted. Just move on up. Okay, then I move the whole works up to the next string. The muting technique should just be duplicated from string to string though. So that sounds like this. So when you get comfortable with this, then you can start making yourself available for those flamenco gigs that get offered to you, make the big bucks. But the point is that when you can burn through this exercise like it's second nature and start doing it with your scales, you know, major scale. When you can burn through those like they're second nature, then you will be on your way and your left hand will be effectively muting those strings, and you won't have strings ringing out unintentionally. Let's take a look at your right hand or your picking hand for a moment. Now, when I'm playing, I generally alternate between my first and second fingers like so. You know, and there are players that use 3 or 4 fingers, and then there are guys like Stanley Clark who, you know, say they use all 5, and boy, they wish they had more, you know. But I generally use just 2, and I find that to be more than ample for being able to express myself. When you're practicing, I definitely encourage you to strictly alternate between your first and second fingers when you're picking. And that might be uncomfortable for some of you, but I assure you, if you invest about a week and a half to 2 weeks of time practicing every day your scales using this method, at the end of that time, you'll wonder how in the world you ever functioned without alternating your fingers. Your facility on the instrument will skyrocket, and you'll just be able to play a lot more intricate or complicated things very smoothly and naturally. Okay? Let's get back specifically to muting again, but this time from the perspective of the right hand. You can apply the technique I'm about to describe to a 4-string bass or a 6-string bass, an extended range bass. It applies uniformly. If you are playing a 4-string bass, obviously I'm playing a 5, just ignore the high G string and let's just imagine that this is your bass, okay? I want to show you something that is going to result in maximum bang for the buck in terms of muting. What I do when I'm playing notes on my lowest string, in this case might be, if you're playing a 4-string, it'd be your E, I rest my thumb on my pickup, like so. Now, when I start playing notes on the next string up, in this case the E, I'm like so. When I start playing notes on the next higher string, the A string, I will shift my thumb to rest on the B string, like so. Muting-wise, what's happening here? Well, I'm playing notes on the A string, right? My finger is raking down into the E string, so it's not ringing, and my thumb is resting on the B string, so the B string's not ringing. Okay, so we've got 3 strings taken care of with my right hand, and how much extra thought is this taking on my part? It's taking nothing, right? Now, when I move up and start playing notes on my next higher string, in this case the D, or for you 4-string players, this would be your high G, right? I shift my thumb to, in this case, the E string, and do this. And I rest the side of my thumb up against my low B. Muting-wise, now what's happening? Well, I'm playing notes on the D. The A string's not ringing because I'm raking down into it. I'm resting my thumb on the E string, and my thumb is also muting the B string. How much extra thought is this taking? Again, none. Okay? When I actually play notes on the high G here, I don't shift my thumb an additional time because then you start dealing with muting weirdnesses with your B. You start needing to contort yourself. And what I generally do at this point, if I need to do additional muting, is just make sure my left hand is in place. So try practicing your scales and the various exercises that you're doing using this flatted left hand and shifting right hand position that we've talked about. And play them as slowly as you need to ensure that you're incorporating the various elements we've discussed. I think that in very short order you'll find that you're having an easier time playing cleaner than ever. Cool? As a bass player, you're holding an instrument in your hand that is the hippest instrument in the band. But that notwithstanding, it's also an instrument that affords zillions of different notes to play and sequences in which to play them, and just generally countless different ways of expressing yourself musically. I feel that one of the more important things you can do to get comfortable on your instrument is to know your fingerboard and see how it all ties together so that you don't have like a favorite or maybe even a certain limited range that you feel comfortable and you get up here and it's like, oh, I'm lost. The first part of this is basically to memorize the names of all the notes at the 7th fret and lower, okay? This is within the primary groove range of the instrument, If you're up here, you're doing more of a solo type of thing usually. Okay? Now there are some tricks to memorizing these notes. Your C major scale, let's just play that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. See this? C, C. These are an octave apart, as you probably know. This shape is what I refer to as octave shape number 1, okay? So what happens is, if you know these notes, then you know that if this is a D, C, D, E, right? Here's D. This is D as well, right? Based on octave shape number 1. So based on just octave shape number 1 and your major scale, your C major scale, you know a whole bunch of other notes. This is C, this is C, this is D, this is D, E. Well, you could take it down. Octave, open string, right? F, F, G, G. So you can see that with octave shape number 1, you can actually get a lot of your alternate notes that way. Now, octave shape number 2, what I refer to it as, is a little less comfortable, but and it's not even necessarily one that you'll be using for your actual grooves. But check this out. Here's C, D, E, F, G, A. See this is an A? Okay, this is an A as well, right? See this shape? Obviously, this isn't one you're going to want to incorporate in most of your bass lines, but the point is, this isn't one you'll normally be fingering, but it's really one that you want to memorize because it helps you to tie your whole fingerboard together. Say you're playing a groove and your line is taking you down into this general region near the nut, okay? Well, you're going for that familiar pattern and you start walking down and suddenly you realize that